the extent that these alternative products are more expensive and worse, you are going to be motivated to do some motivated reasoning to keep having the nicer and cheaper thing, basically, right? But to the extent that they're not anymore, you're not going to be motivated to do that. So I think it really all ties in together. And when the products reach that tipping point to actually being consistently nicer and cheaper, why would anyone pay more for worse food, basically,
Yeah.
right? They won't. So I think the animal industry's days are numbered by innovation alone. But I think that the push factors need to be there as well, pushing people away from animal products, continuing to show them the factory farming imagery, continuing to win the argument on health and the environment. And then you need the pull factors of products getting better and cheaper. And I think over time, that's what gets us there.
Hello and welcome back. In season 2 of ProVeg Talks, we'll go beyond innovation to examine the real-world challenges keeping plant-based food from reaching its full potential. This series is your practical guide to navigating and overcoming the commercial challenges faced by alternative proteins today. Each episode dives into one of the most pressing hurdles in the sector, from cracking consumer resistance to scaling up production, securing investment, winning in retail, and much more. Hosted by me, Gemma Tadman, this series brings together leading founders, retailers, marketers, investors, and researchers to share the hard-won lessons, proven tactics, and fresh ideas. Whether you're working in food service, developing plant-based products, or trying to win shelf space, this series will deliver the insights you need to succeed in an increasingly competitive market. You'll notice that we're launching into the second season with a new name and refreshed branding. Well, we thought it was about time to take things up a notch and expand our repertoire a bit. I'll still be chatting with food industry experts, but we'll also begin hosting new topics with other ProVeg colleagues on health and nutrition and sustainability. So stay tuned. In today's episode, we're setting the stage for Series 2 with a big picture look at what's holding plant-based back from truly going mainstream. To help us unpack the key commercial challenges, from pricing and positioning to the psychology of consumer choices, I'm joined by someone who's right at the forefront of this conversation, Chris Bryant, founder of Bryant Research. Chris, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
So to start, can you briefly tell us about Bryant Research and the work that you do within the alternative protein space?
Yes, absolutely. Well, we are a social science think tank. We provide services to alternative proteins companies, as you mentioned, and also to animal nonprofits. We do social science of all kinds. We do a lot of survey work, focus groups. Increasingly, we're also doing policy-focused stuff and kind of white papers. So a range of kind of research and knowledge work across a bunch of different topics as well. We do, again, on protein stuff like you mentioned, but we do, one of our research is very focused on plant-based pet foods, for example. Another is focused on kind of farmer-facing issues and areas of agreement between vegans and farmers, for example. So there's kind of specialisms developing within that as well, which is nice. We're a team of 7 of us in total, including myself. So it's nice to have that breadth in the team where people can get a little bit deeper into their sort of interest areas.
Amazing. So a very well-rounded research base that you have there.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. We have people from different backgrounds as well. I have a bit of an all over the place background. I did a business undergraduate and then a policy master's and then a psychology PhD. So sort of across social science, really. My research director now is also psychology PhD. And then a couple of the researchers on the team are from a psychology background as well. But then we also have somebody who did a philosophy and politics degree. So it's a bit more of that kind of institutional and argumentation and reasoning focused as opposed to empirical focused, although she does empirical work as well. And then there's Billy who did a history degree, and he's just he's something else actually. You'd like to, yeah, you should interview Billy as well, to be honest. He's very media friendly.
Amazing. Well, from your perspective, Where is the plant-based market right now in terms of mainstream adoption? Are we past the early adopter phase or are we still stuck in it?
I think we had a period where there were sales boosted in a number of ways, and with a number of causes. So I think COVID was basically really good for the plant-based meat market, and then kind of coming out of COVID, there were a few things that were working against the market in the last few years, I would say. Some of those are sort of coming to a close as well. One of those was, or has been and continues to be to some extent, economic hardship, inflation, price of everything going up, and so on. That's kind of an interesting one because although plant-based meats tend to be more expensive than meat from animals, kind of pound for pound, it really is getting there in terms of price parity, and the cheapest plant-based meats are now there, and some of them are cheaper now than meat in the UK. And so there's been sort of a short-term pressure on the industry from that perspective, but I think in the long term it's going to be an opportunity really because all of that inflation hit the animal products much harder than it hit the plant-based products, and that's what's caused, this catching up of the prices to the point where again the plant-based products are now very often cheaper. Or not very often. I shouldn't say very often, right? For the most part, they are still more expensive, but again, it's getting there, right? So that's one thing. The other thing was just kind of like everything's going back to normal now, isn't it? Kind of vibe that will have surely had, taken its toll on lots of things that people picked up during the pandemic. Oh, I've started doing yoga or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Like, you remember that first month where
Yeah.
we all did yoga with Adrian, didn't
Bike
we?
rides.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I think there's some of that sort of back to normal vibe happening as well. And the other thing, of course, is the discourse around ultra processed foods, which
Mm.
for me is one of the most misleading pieces of, I'm going to say, pseudoscience out there, because the whole model is just reductive, right? It's fits foods into four categories and then assesses them based on their membership of those four categories. And just give you an idea of how reductive it is and how silly it is. If you have a pack of plain crisps, which you read the ingredients and it's potatoes and oil and salt, right? That counts as a category three, processed but not ultra processed. Now, if you add a bit of onion salt, that's now category four ultra processed food. Now, that has not made that product less healthy. It just hasn't. If anything, it might have made it more healthy. So it's really arbitrary the way these categories are defined. There's a lot of disagreement amongst experts and amongst the public, certainly. There's no clarity as to the implications of this, where foods fit. People now have the general idea that ultra processed foods are bad. And by the way, it's been specifically pushed by the meat industry, this idea that plant-based meats are ultra-processed and therefore they must be unhealthy. Plant-based meats are specifically more healthy than the meat that they replace. They have lower calorie density, they have lower levels of fat, lower levels of saturated fat, and they have higher levels of fiber. There are studies showing that people lose more weight when they go switch to plant-based meat. There's studies showing that they're equal in terms of muscle synthesis. And they're made now to cater to all sorts of dietary requirements and so on. So there really is no health case against plant-based meat vis-a-vis meat from animals, but they have done a great job, the lobbyists on the other side, of kind of creating a vibe that there is a health case against it because it's called ultra-processed. It's a very clear sleight of hands for anyone who's paying a little bit of attention, but unfortunately, I mean, it's my job to pay attention to this, I suppose, but
Mhm.
right, most people, it kind of feels right. Processed equals unhealthy, right? Yeah, surely that must be right. Unfortunately, with respect to meat and meat alternatives, it's not the case. And I've been told, I don't know if this is true because someone just put this in a LinkedIn comment. I haven't seen it, but apparently Carlos Monteiro, who's the guy who sort of invented the ultra processed framework, well, he was quoted in the Guardian as saying we shouldn't take this framework too seriously and stick to it too strictly last year. And somebody told me a LinkedIn comment, again, I don't know if this is true, that he said in a conference of 2,000 people that plant-based meat specifically shouldn't be, penalized on the basis of being ultra-processed. Um,
Interesting.
yeah, yeah. So, I mean, there's a ton of misinformation. And again, it's very, very deliberate, right? This is not a conspiracy theory, right? 2019, the Centre for Consumer Freedom were paying thousands of, millions of dollars to do the Super Bowl ad. They did the New York Times ad saying plant-based meats processed. Right. So this has been out in the open for 5 or 6 years that they're doing this. They started doing it pretty much as plant-based meat started to take off. So they were already on the threat. And it is a threat to their business, right? It's entirely predictable that they would have some sort of strategy to take care of that. So that was a long answer to your
Yeah, I
question
don't
about
know.
where we are
That's
now, but
super interesting and a great way to, kick things off. Gives a very kind of multifaceted overview of the situation of things right now and the danger of misinformation, as you mentioned. Let's start with something else that feels a bit like the elephant in the room for brands at the moment. The attitude behavior gap. Many consumers say that they want to eat more sustainably, but the sales data doesn't always reflect that. What's going on here?
yeah, I think that's a really good question. There's all sorts of ways of talking about this, but basically it comes down to we all wish we were better than we are, don't we? I mean, right?
Yeah.
We all wish we would work out more and eat less cake and everything else, right? But it's hard to do the right thing, usually. That's why we even bother identifying it as the right thing, I suppose. Otherwise, it'd just be normal. So, yeah, I mean, in most cases, it has been the case that if you want to have the more sustainable and healthy plant-based alternative to meat, it is going to cost you more. And until quite recently, it was the case that it's probably going to taste worse as well, frankly. Like if presumably you and I are both vegan, so we're not playing this game. But if you're an omnivore and you're deciding, shall I get the meat or the plant-based meat? Until quite recently, it wasn't much of a contest. And I say until quite recently, there was two really cool reports in the last couple of years from this organization called Nectar, and they did blind taste tests of. I don't know their blind taste tests. They did taste tests. They did taste tests of all sorts of different plant-based meats. These are products in the US and also of animal products in the same category. So they had sort of chicken nuggets and burgers and sausages and different categories of foods, right? I think they had about 5 different categories. And in the first year, they had given an average score for each category for the plant-based, like how good are the plant-based products on average for chicken nuggets, say, and then how good is the best product in that category. So you have like the average score and the best score, and then you have the animal product score. Now, 2024 scores, most of them, the animal products were better than the plant-based products. I think there was one chicken nugget that was rated more highly than the animal product, but for the most part, like burgers, they reported it honestly. They said, look, it's not there yet on taste. 2025 report came out very recently, a couple of weeks ago, a few weeks ago, and there were, I think it was like 15 products that were rated more highly than the animal product now.
Yeah.
So the taste element, which is a really, really crucial, the most important part, right? At the end of the day, people are gonna pick the food they find tasty for the most part, right? And you can be convinced on a reflective level about factory farming's bad and it's bad for the environment and all this sort of stuff. But on an automatic motivation level, what we call automatic motivations, it's like, well, that's going to taste nice and it's cheap, so I'm going to buy it, right? That's increasingly we are challenging that though, because now again the plant-based stuff making leaps and bounds in the gains in taste, even in the last year still. I mean, for you and me, these products are not that novel anymore, but the last year, right, massive improvements in how many
Absolutely.
people are finding them tasty. And this is since 2024, right? Feels like yesterday. And it's going to be continue to be the case, right? These products are only getting better. The best ones will survive. And sometimes you'll see stories about, these companies going out of business and isn't it a shame and stuff. To some extent, right? But that is creative destruction in the market. That is the market choosing the best and best X cheapest products, I guess. And those ones survive and then it iterates and maybe something better and cheaper comes along and then that survives. That's how it goes. And that's why these products are steadily getting better. And, NB, animal products are staying the same. Beef tastes the same as it did last year, but plant-based beef tastes better than it did last year, and it's going to taste better again next year. So that's only going in one direction. The price is also coming down. Once you get the taste and the price, those are the two main things, really. And then I think that when it is just as enjoyable and just as affordable, if not more, I think that people lose. the average person loses the motivation to do the motivated reasoning. Because why would you bother arguing that maybe chickens aren't conscious if the plant-based chicken nuggets taste better anyway, right? Like,
Yeah.
why am I going to bother? Um, so yeah, I think that's all really exciting and plays into like the broader psychology behind meat consumption.
In your view, then, how much of this attitude behavior gap is down to individual psychology? So things like decision fatigue or cognitive dissonance versus the structural barriers that you mentioned, like pricing and availability.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that there has to be both factors, basically. We sometimes talk about push and pull factors. Now, confusingly, in this idea, the push and the pull are both going in the same direction, right? But you've got what you might think of as conventional animal advocacy, activism and documentaries and billboards, whatever else it may be, pushing people away from animal products and saying, look, here's images of factory farming, or here's, the stats about climate change, whatever it may be. That's like the push factors. And then on the other side, you also have pull factors, which is basically alternative proteins, pulling people towards and saying, look, we actually have better tasting plant-based chicken nuggets than regular chicken nuggets. Like, come over here, basically, right? So that is about all of the products getting better and cheaper. And the key thing is these two work together. So I think that there really needs to be synergy and mutual support between the alternative proteins industry and the broader animal movement, because they are both going to the same ends. And it breaks my heart when I see stuff like really well-meaning, Whole Foods plant-based vegans who will like lay into the old proteins and kind of do the meat industry talking points about this is ultra processed and it's bad. It's like if you don't want to eat it, that's fine. No one's going to make you eat it if you don't want to. But also like be aware of kind of who's pushing that and why, and accept that not everyone will do whole foods plant-based, and actually a lot of people will find these products really useful. And if the alternative is killing animals, basically, that's basically a good thing.
Yeah, ease and convenience for some people, isn't it? It's about a stepping stone for meat eaters, and flexitarians to step into plant-based.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And that's definitely a factor as well. Yeah, if you are someone who I'm terrible at cooking. I'm a really, really bad cook, and I don't. I mean, generally, my wife cooks. Frankly, I mean that's a bit of an outdated thing to say now for our generation, isn't it? But that's the truth. So I came last place on a vegan come dine with me.
Oh no.
Yeah, I did. I was on come dine with me about 3 years ago, and I came last. But oh well. Uh, Yeah, so I mean, if you're someone who has like quite a limited culinary range, like myself, you will find these products really useful if you're kind of trying to dip your toes in the water of
Yeah.
eating less meat, and all you know how to cook is sausages. Now you can just swap it out directly. It's going to be the same process. You don't have to learn
Yeah.
a new recipe. I think, people like me or like my dad, or really all the men in my family, probably have about 3 recipes on the hard drive. And that's all we'd eat if we were left to our own devices.
So when we zoom out to the broader market, you've mentioned price already a little bit, but what are the real commercial barriers keeping plant-based from becoming a default choice rather than a niche one?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that there are a couple of things. One is this somewhat boring point about margins. Basically, if you're a supermarket, you can take a lower profit margin on products that you know you're going to sell lots of. So if you're the Tesco down the road from me, probably selling a 2 pint bottle of milk every like minute, well not quite, but right. So they can accept like a 2% profit margin on that because they know they're going to sell so many of them that that's going to be a lot of 2%, right? Now, if you're the plant-based version and you haven't caught on yet to the same level, you're only going to sell, let's say 10%. Well, for dairy, I think it is about 15% of the market. Let's say you're selling 15% the volume. Well, in order to take up the same amount of shelf space now, from the supermarket's perspective, I have to have a higher profit margin on each one, I'm afraid. So if I'm in my negotiations with, Oatly or whoever it may be, I'm afraid I need to add on 20%, whereas for the dairy milk, I only need to add on 2%. But like that's, until it's mainstream, that is keeps happening. And of course, that's a bit of a catch-22, right? Because the price stays high while it's not mainstream, and while it's not
Yeah.
mainstream, the price stays high. So there is a little bit of a tipping point there. So that's one thing. Then there's kind of the more interesting um, social psychology answer about nudging. There's an awful lot that you can do with the way that choices are presented that will invite people to take one choice rather than the other, to invite people to take the plant-based rather than the animal products, for example. So you mentioned defaults. Defaults is definitely, one of the best ones, one of the most replicable, sorry, words, interventions that you can do in terms of in terms of menus and so on. Having, the plant-based option being the default, you can still have meat if you want to, but you have to kind of ask for it specifically, or you have to ask to see the meat menu rather than ask to see the vegan menu, for example. That's a really powerful one. Really can make it from like 10% choosing vegan to like 90% choosing vegan in the strong cases. On average, I think it's about 30 percentage point increase, which is a lot, right? Then there's other things that you can do. There's a strong effect from having menus be majority plant-based. So if you have a menu that's only 25% plant-based options, it's not that surprising that a minimum, that a minority of people are choosing those options. Again, a lot of places might not want to have a 100% plant-based menu, but if they have, as many animal options as they want, and then they just have three times as many plant-based options, such that they make up the majority of the menu still, you're still going to get the majority of people choosing the plant-based options because that's just the
Yeah.
majority of the options. So you can do things like that, which are, again, it's not restricting anyone's choice, but it's inviting people and prompting people to make the right kind of choice. There's a few other things that I could talk about as well, but yeah.
Do you think that plant-based also has a value perception problem?
They're gonna, I guess it depends on who you ask, right? Definitely there will be
Yeah.
some people who are like just allergic to that brand. But as with anything, it's like segmentation of the market kind of approach, I suppose. For me, I look for plant-based as something that I'm going to buy, and I'm sure a lot of people listening are the same. So there is the sort of well, what's the word? Yeah, recurring question. I can't think of the word I want. Um, this question about plant-based versus vegan labels. And it has become, I think, quite clear that if the goal is to nudge people towards choosing more plant-based options, you're better off calling them plant-based rather than calling them vegan, sort of for the average person. Now, again, you and I might not be allergic to the vegan brand and might, approach that or look for that. But, for the average person who's going to make a choice between A or B, and now that doesn't mean that there can't be value in vegan labels and vegan trademarks and stuff like that, because I think that those things serve a valuable purpose. But I would focus in terms of like product names. I would avoid calling things like vegan chicken sandwich or anything like that in a very sort of prominent way. Certainly like menu items and stuff like that. I mean, the issue is that people associate that with a social group of which they are not a part. So it's like, yeah. And there's actually, funnily enough, I was out on the weekend. I was drinking, I drank a gluten-free beer, and I noticed that the fridge was very, very full of the gluten-free ones, and all the other ones were quite like diminished already. I thought, oh, this is interesting.
I wonder
I'm
why.
not, yeah, I'm not gluten-free. I've never done that before, but I thought I'd give this gluten-free beer a try, and it's just interesting that nobody else. I mean, it was just normal beer, right? It wasn't alcohol-free.
Yeah.
I'm drinking it. It's normal. It was interesting that people were evidently looking at that and thinking, well,
Mm.
that's for people, people who are doing gluten free. And if I'm not one
Yeah.
of them, it's not really for me. Which again,
Interesting.
it's just normal beer, right? Like, yeah.
That is very interesting, isn't it? Just the label was enough to put some people off of trying it.
Yeah, and I noticed actually that all the beers were vegan, and I think they even had like a
Mm.
vegan logo on the back, sort of, in amongst the copyrights or whatever. I'm sure that if you had called one of them vegan beer on the front of it,
Yeah.
that would have been the least chosen one, right? Probably would have.
Yeah.
But again, they were all still vegan beers. But I'm sure if you called one of them vegan beer, that'd be like no one chooses that now. Yeah.
So carrying on this theme a little bit, Something we hear a lot is that messaging matters, whether it's better for the planet or healthier for you. These claims can cut both ways. What does the research say about how we should be positioning plant-based foods? Yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this particular question.
Yeah, I think that the research overwhelmingly shows that plant-based alternatives are healthier and better for the environment. So I think that it would be beneficial for plant-based foods if there was enforcement of some sort of clear, consistent, mandatory labeling that makes it clear to anyone who is buying any food what's the environmental impact, what's the health implications of this, and that would be done through, as it is currently, by the way, sort of proper metrics like fat and calories and protein and everything else, and not through like warning ultra processed labels, for example, which is going to be very misleading. So, yeah, I think that there's a lot of misinformation now that tries to position plant-based as ultra-processed and therefore unhealthy. And now it is extending to positioning red meat as the solution to environmental and health problems. I've just been calling out this AHDB report this week, which they've put out this report about red meat's really protective against anemia and some forms of agroecological systems could be good for the environment. There's completely no mention that anemia is 4% of the population, but overweight and obese are 64% of the population. There's no claim about overall meat consumption and what needs to happen with overall meat consumption, but they are making a big song and dance about these tiny minority of cases where more meat might be a good thing actually for anemic people and so on. And this kind of thing is just very typical, basically. Like this is the latest instantiation of this, but they are just doing constantly now these red herring reports that are various meat industry orgs coming out and saying, look, anemia is a bad thing, isn't it? And then like waving that in front of policymakers to show that we don't need to reduce meat consumption. Yeah, frankly, they've been getting away with it really, and I'm gonna start calling them out more aggressively because I think that it's the only way to disincentivize this kind of thing, really. I mean, if there's criticisms of, oh, the AHDB did this misleading report, like, okay, no, do you know what I mean? Like, it's kind of, it gets lost in the fray. I'm looking to talk to the individuals who are putting their names to these reports, these so-called scientists who are signing off on this rubbish that the meat industry can then represent to mean that we don't need to reduce our meat consumption. And they're rattled. One of them's now blocked me from AHDB. A couple of the researchers from their like various meat industry research orgs are commenting on my post saying, "Oh, this is, you're being too aggressive" and so on.
Wow.
They're writing the same sort of research. That's why, right? And they don't want me to look at their reports and say you're full of it as well. But they are full of it, and it's I'm I'm generally a very nice bloke, right? I'm not normally an aggressive, confrontational guy at all, really. But I think that sometimes you have to have a bit of a backbone in order to support doing the right thing. And these are people who are deliberately, knowingly putting their name to misinformation that can then be used to kill more animals for food. And I don't think that's a cool thing to be doing. And I'm not afraid to say that.
So, what messaging would you say resonates best with consumers? Would it be ethical messaging or health-orientated messaging, taste-based messaging, or environmental messaging? Are there kinds of messaging and positioning of products that backfire in terms of kind of putting consumers off of products?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there probably are, but they might not be the ones that you think would be.
Mm.
So there's a couple of things. One is that people tend to think of healthy as meaning not very tasty. And you'll know this when you go around the supermarket, if you're like buying anything really, and there's like the low salts version, it's the crappy version, isn't it? It's like, come on, give me the salty version, the low sugar version, right? It's like, I
Yeah.
mean, sure, it is healthier, right? No doubt, but come on, it's not going to be as nice, right? Low fat, all of that stuff. So you find that very much with respect to marketing of plant-based products, but a lot of brands, I think we might have been baited a bit by the ultra-processed stuff, to be honest, because
Mm.
a lot of brands are doing healthy branding. And to be fair, that is the right, that is the right approach for some brands. But a potential backfire of that is people do perceive it as less tasty, obviously without having tasted it. Or even after tasting it, actually, there are some studies showing that they had two identical drinks that's like some sort of mango smoothie, and they have people taste them and rate how tasty this was out of 10. And in one condition, they're labeled as healthy drink, healthy mango drink, and another condition is labeled as unhealthy, indulgent mango
Interesting.
drink. And you can guess the punchline, right? Like people
Yeah.
rate it as, I think it's about 2 out of 10 points more tasty if it's just
Wow.
labeled as unhealthy, as it's the same drink. But just by being, oh, this is a nice sugary thing, right? It's better than like this is some fruit
The
admin.
mind boggles.
I know, yeah. So I think that potentially, and I've been mentioning plant-based things are lower in fat, lower in saturated fat, lower in calorie density, higher in fiber. That's all true. It might not be the best
Mm,
thing to be putting on the front of the package. There are some consumers and a lot of the consumers who are heavy consumers of this sort of stuff who are like concerned about their health and so on. So it may be, maybe it works better in this category than it does on average, but it's even been shown that adding just a healthy label to these plant-based products compared to no label sort of decreased selection and decreased
wow.
perceptions of tastiness and stuff like that. So the health thing is like approach with caution, basically, in terms of branding. And the other thing that I would highlight is that people are much, much more concerned about animal welfare than anyone tends to think. If we had to guess how concerned the average person is about animal welfare, but guess way less concerned than they actually are, or at least than they say they are. Now, obviously, from a vegan perspective, it's easy to be sort of skeptical and say, well, look, most people are consuming factory farm products, and that's true, but most people are not actually thinking about that, or probably even aware of it, right? They kind of just think about the nice cow in the field, don't they? I think that of, there's a lot of dissonance around that. Um, and that makes it an interesting world to be in. But yeah, I think that we as a movement should not be as hesitant as we are to use animal messaging and animal imagery and so on. It's horses for courses, right? So if you're having a environment debate, you actually probably don't want to start appealing to animal welfare because it's going to kind of make you come across as biased. But in general, in public communications, I think that people are much more open than you would think to here's some factory farming, this is bad, isn't it? And we've recently wrapped up a big study where we are going to show this. We ran factory farming of pig ads in 4 regions in the UK through Facebook, sort of targeted ads. And then we got retail data on pork sales around the country. And we've shown that basically the more people in these 4 regions saw these ads, the less pork they were buying.
Wow.
So it's most compelling, like, real consumption data, really bit large scale intervention, and everything. It's scalable as well. It's something that you could do. We spent 20 grand on Facebook ads, but you could spend 10% of that or less, and still have a meaningful impact. Again, you can do it very targeted as well. So if you are someone who lives in like some remote village and you had means to do this, you could blanket your village in vegan ads, and you'd probably start finding vegan products in your village shop.
Amazing. Well, let's talk about consumer types now. Who is actually buying plant-based right now? Are we over reliant on early adopters and vegans and veggies, or are flexitarians and kind of new triers driving growth?
Yeah, this is an interesting one because it's um I think it's an area where it is easy for a lot of us to get it wrong. So there was a lot of stats sort of 5 years ago about the majority of people buying plant-based products are not vegetarians, they're actually meat eaters, and 90% of people who bought Impossible were actually meat eaters and stuff like this. I think that is true and accurate, but it's probably not reflective of actually the sales volume. So if you think about it, it's not the same thing, right? Like that you
Yeah.
are going to have pretty much with respect to any product, or well, I won't say that, but most like consumables maybe, you'll have this sort of Pareto distribution, like an 80/20 principle, right? Whereby you basically have your heavy consumers who buy it every week and eat it every day, Then you have, a bunch of people who tried it once, or maybe have it like once a month or something like that. But basically, most of your sales are coming from, 80% of your sales are coming from 20% of your actual consumer base. So all of that is a bit of a convoluted way of saying, I think that at this stage, there's a lot. I think at this stage, most people have tried plant-based meat, but most of them are not buying it regularly. There needs to be push factors as well, like encouraging people to re-engage again. Like, okay, I'll give this another try. Then I saw this factory farming ad. I guess I'm re-motivated to try and do something about it. And basically, it needs to be a process of the push factors keeping pressure on people to try alternatives, the alternatives continually getting better and cheaper as they are, and over time that cycle will be what gets us there essentially. And then you get to at some point a tipping point where, with respect to social norms, when something catches on with about 25% of the population, has a much higher chance of catching on as the new norm in general. So we're at about 15%, including vegetarians and pescatarians in the UK. So it's not far off, right? We're really getting there. It's 50, like 1 in 6 people don't eat meat. That's quite a lot if you think about
It's,
it.
yeah, it's pretty good.
It's pretty good. So we're getting there. And I mean, yeah, I think that plant-based products continuing to get better and cheaper, winning the argument on the health and environment fronts, and not accepting junk science, which kind of implies without properly claiming and then snakes off that we don't need to do anything about meat consumption production. Um, and yeah, keeping the push factor pressure on. We do, I think there's again something there's a little bit misinformation. There's this idea that if we show people factory farming imagery, it's going to give them cognitive dissonance, and that'll be bad because then they'll, be motivated to change their beliefs. That is part of the story, and it's one possible outcome. We're all familiar with this phenomenon where basically you're talking to, if you've done any kind of vegan advocacy, uh, people are making up their reasons to arrive at the conclusion that they want. That's cognitive dissonance, that's motivated reasoning. Now, to the extent that these alternative products are more expensive and worse, you are going to be motivated to do some motivated reasoning to keep having the nicer and cheaper thing, basically, right? But to the extent that they're not anymore, you're not going to be motivated to do that. So I think it really all ties in together. And when the products reach that tipping point of actually being consistently nicer and cheaper, why would anyone pay more for worse food, basically?
Yeah.
Right? They won't. So I think the animal industry's days are numbered by innovation alone. But I think that the push factors need to be there as well. Actually, instead of innovation alone, pull factors and push factors, both you both need them, right? Pushing people away from animal products, continuing to show them the factory farming imagery, continuing to win the argument on health and the environment, and then you need the pull factors of products getting better and cheaper. And I think over time, that's what gets us there.
Thank you. Based on your research, what's one widely held assumption about plant-based consumers or products actually, that you think the industry really needs to change?
That's an interesting question. I think so. One prediction I have, and we'll see if this comes true. I notice a lot of plant-based brands now starting to, I guess they think that they are responding to the ultra-processed concern. And again, we'll see, maybe they're playing it correctly. A lot of plant-based meat brands are starting to now, I would say, go backwards and come out with products that are basically like bean burgers and like mushroom
Mm,
bait. Do you know what I mean?
yeah.
And again, we'll see how those products do. I think that the ultra processed talking point is like something that people will say down the pub. It's basically a concept invented to be pub chat. And people don't have a good those. This is the thing, really. Those new products are still going to count as ultra processed foods in that framework. Maybe that
Yeah.
doesn't matter because again, the whole ultra processed food thing is really about vibes. It really is.
It's all about vibes.
So it literally is just about vibes. So if you came out with some new thing that's like says mushroom or whatever, it still counts as ultra processed, but it's got a healthier vibe. Maybe that's enough, basically. I think, yeah, I don't know. We'll see what happens with that, but I think that focusing on taste and price will continue to be the winner. And if it is the case that like stuff like meat just tastes the nicest, I think those products will continue to do the best, but we'll see.
So we've talked about a lot about problems. Let's look ahead as we come to a close. For businesses that want to move from niche to mass appeal, what are the most important levers to pull?
Yeah, good question. I think price if you can. I mean, it's an easy answer really and a difficult solution. Because obviously it's much easier said than done, right? Like I do think that in the long term, the reason why plant-based products are better for the environment and have a lower water footprint and all that kind of stuff is because they use fewer agricultural resources, right? You have to feed farm animals loads of soy and stuff like that, and that's a very intensive process. A fraction of that amount of soy can make you 1,000 sausages, whatever, right? So it just doesn't make sense economically that the animal products would be cheaper in the long run. You need way more stuff, and you've got to raise these animals. You've got to have a facility for raising animals. Now, at the moment, they're largely like subsidized, and a lot of the mechanism for most subsidies going to animal products is because well, in Europe, subsidies are done based on land area, and then animals use most of the land area because they're consuming all these crops, right? Hence, most subsidies go to the animals. So yes, that was a diversion on the way to talking about price. So if you can produce something with far fewer inputs over time, it will be cheaper for consumers. There's various reasons why that's not the case currently. The margins thing, which I mentioned, right? Supermarkets need a higher margin because they're a minority product. There's also a point about just a lot of these companies are quite new and startups, and they're needing to like recoup investment capital and stuff. Whereas obviously the animal companies have been around for donkey's years, and there's a few other things going on as well, which are making plant-based products more expensive in the short term. But again, we're actually now getting a lot of, I think corn was cheapest in some category, and that's now cheaper than animal products on average. So once again, like I think that once plant-based products are like 50p or a quid cheaper for a pack of whatever, I really don't think that anyone like that's going to be enough for most people. I really do think it will be. Yeah, we'll see.
If you had a room full of plant-based startups, investors, and food service operators, what's one piece of advice that you'd give them to increase their chances of success?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, well, focus on getting the quality and the price right. I think that most people in any industry would, yeah, that's pretty generic advice, really, but taste and price is going to be the most important things. And then I think there are health signals that these products can give, or really, I guess it comes down to labeling. If there was clear and consistent health labeling, environmental labeling, animal welfare labeling for food products in general, there would be no way to hide that plant-based products are just better. Whereas currently there's enough like ill-defined, not legally protected agroecological terms and enough vagueness around this idea about ultra-processed, and maybe that's the important thing now, and enough nothing in terms of animal welfare labeling, right? You can opt into these optional schemes if you pay for them, and we probably are not going to really enforce them too much if you start paying for them. There's really, the health labeling is decent, but environmental and animal welfare labeling are not. And the old proteins industry might not think of that as an issue for them, but it is, at least indirectly, right? Because obviously the animal welfare rating for an alternative protein product is nothing, right? It's just it doesn't have animals in it. But maybe it could get top marks on that score or whatever. And I think that the other point about that is that it would, if we did have the type of consistent, clear, mandatory animal welfare labeling that's currently being considered by DEFRA and by the government, it would become quite clear to consumers that actually most of your products are coming from factory farms, mate. And currently that's able to be hidden very well. And the industry is trying very hard to keep that the case.
Hmm. Well, Chris, this has been incredibly insightful. Before we wrap up, where can listeners find your work and follow what you're doing at Bright Research?
Thank you for asking. Yeah, we're brianresearch.co.uk is Brian Research, and we're very active on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Chris Bryant with a little orange diamond afterwards. And as of recently, you can now find me on YouTube at Chris Bryant PhD.
Thank you, and thanks again for being here. And to our listeners, stay tuned for the next episode and head to the New Food Hub for more content.